There are moments in the wild that no one is supposed to witness. Moments that happen in silence and darkness, in the kind of cold that erases sound. This is the story of one of those moments and the woman who almost drove past it. The call had come in just after 4 in the afternoon, when the light was already failing, and the storm had stopped pretending to be gentle. 2 hikers had reported what they thought were injured lynxes on the shoulder of a forest back road, about 11 miles east of the wildlife center, past the Second Pine Ridge, on a stretch of county road that most locals avoided in winter. By the time the rescue truck turned onto that road, the wind had swallowed the tire tracks of every car that had come before it. The headlights pushed maybe 8 feet into the white before giving up entirely. The driver, a 10-year wildlife rehabilitator named Kara, leaned forward over the wheel the way people do when leaning helps them see better, even though it never does. Her partner, James, had his window cracked 2 inches, listening. That was his method, listening for something underneath the storm. A cry, a rustle, the soft percussion of an animal trying to stay alive. They had done this kind of call before. Injured deer, a coyote with a broken leg, once a great horned owl so cold it had simply stopped moving on a fence post and waited for someone to find it. They knew how these calls usually ended. They drove anyway. It was James who saw them first, not because they were visible, exactly, but because the snow on the left shoulder had a texture that was wrong, a slight hollow, a depression that didn't match the wind patterns around it. He touched Kara's arm without saying anything, and she stopped the truck. They sat for a moment, engine idling, watching, and then one of the shapes moved, barely, a slow contraction of something living, and they both got out at the same time. What they found in the hollow was 2 bobcats pressed so tightly together that in the beam of the flashlight, they looked like a single animal. The larger one was curled completely around the smaller, her chin resting over the other's neck, her body curved like a parenthesis. The snow had drifted around them, and in the cold math of survival, the hollow they had chosen was the only reason either of them still had a heartbeat. Kara knelt first. She reached out slowly, the way you do when you're hoping the animal is conscious enough to be afraid of you. It wasn't. The smaller bobcat was motionless. For a long moment, neither rescuer spoke. James said quietly, "She's been protecting her." He meant it as a statement of fact, but it landed like grief. They worked fast after that. Kara lifted the larger female first. She was heavier than expected, her muscles limp with exhaustion and cold, and wrapped her in a thermal blanket from the kit. James took the smaller one, pressing his fingers gently to the throat, waiting. Then a pulse, faint, irregular, but there. He exhaled, both alive, both barely. The larger female, as she was lifted, made a sound, not a growl, something quieter, lower in the chest. She shifted in the blanket, and even in her weakened state, her body twisted slightly toward the second bobcat as if pulled by instinct. They loaded them into separate soft-sided carriers in the back of the truck, and the moment the partition went between them, the female began to move again. Not frantically, she didn't have the strength for frantic, but with a restless rhythmic shifting that Kara noticed because it didn't match exhaustion. Exhausted animals go still. They don't search. Kara climbed into the back for the drive out. She told herself it was standard protocol. Monitor vitals, check breathing, watch for deterioration. But she stayed because something about the female's movement unsettled her in a way she couldn't name yet. The forest road was slow going. The storm hadn't let up, and the truck rocked gently over ruts buried under snow. In the back, Kara kept her flashlight low, watching. The female was breathing harder now. Her sides were rising and falling with more effort, and every few minutes she would grunt, a short, quiet sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep and involuntary. Kara counted the breaths. She watched the sides. She tilted her head, and then she understood. The shape of the female's abdomen, the rhythm of the grunts, the way she had wrapped herself around something in that hollow, not protecting another animal, not shielding a companion from the cold, but curling her body, like an arc around the only thing that mattered. She hadn't been trying to keep another bobcat warm. She had been trying to keep herself warm enough, long enough, for what her body had not yet finished doing. Kara picked up her radio. Her voice when she spoke was steady. She had trained herself to stay steady, but her hand tightened around the receiver. "We need the veterinary team ready when we arrive," she said. "The female isn't just injured." She paused for one breath. "She's in labor, in the back of that truck, rocking through a blizzard on a road that barely existed." A wild mother held on to the last of her warmth. Outside, the pines bent under the weight of the storm. Inside, something was just beginning. The wildlife center was lit up before the truck even stopped. Someone had propped the intake doors open, and warm light spilled out onto the snow in a long yellow rectangle. The veterinary team was already gloved, already quiet, the particular quiet of people who have learned not to speak until they know what they're dealing with. Kara had radioed ahead. They knew, but knowing and seeing are different things, and when they lifted Mara out of the carrier, the room tightened. She was frostbitten along her ears and paws, severely dehydrated, her body temperature dangerously low. They moved her to a heated examination table, layering warm towels, attaching an IV line with the kind of practiced efficiency that looks calm from the outside and feels like controlled urgency from within. The younger Bobcat was taken to an adjacent enclosure, stable, breathing, his eyes half open and tracking. He would recover. But it was Mara who held the room's attention. Her contractions had strengthened on the drive in. Now they came in visible waves, her flanks tightening and releasing, her breathing shallow and fast. The lead veterinarian, Dr. Reyes, worked without rushing. You cannot rush a wild animal in labor. You can only stay close and let the body do what it has always known how to do. The team dimmed the overhead lights. Someone turned off the radio that had been playing in the back office. The center went still except for the hum of the heating units, and the soft sound of Mara breathing through each contraction. The first kitten came just before midnight. It was smaller than any of them expected, barely the length of a hand, its eyes sealed shut, its spotted fur damp and matted flat. It trembled once, then found its breath, and the sound it made was so small and so insistent that one of the younger technicians turned away and pressed her knuckle to her mouth. The second kitten followed within minutes. Then, after a long suspended pause that nobody in the room seemed to breathe through, the third, all alive. Mara was exhausted beyond anything her body should have been able to carry, and yet she turned to them immediately, cleaning, nudging, pulling them close with the automatic authority of a mother who had not needed to be taught. Dr. Reyes stepped back. The team stepped back. Nobody cheered. Nobody needed to. In the adjacent enclosure, the younger male pressed his nose to the wire partition and went still, as if he understood that something had shifted in the world tonight. Outside, the blizzard had begun to quiet. The pines stood heavy with snow, and inside a small room in a wildlife center at the edge of the forest, 3 heartbeats that had not existed an hour ago were now breathing steadily in the straw. The weeks that followed were quiet in the way that healing is always quiet, gradual, unglamorous and easy to overlook if you weren't paying attention. Mara's frostbite healed slowly, beginning at the edges. Her ears, which had gone pale and stiff in the cold, softened back to their natural shape. Her paws, once too tender to bear weight, began carrying her with increasing confidence across the enclosure floor. She ate well, better than expected, and what she didn't spend eating, she spent watching. Her eyes tracked everything, the movements of the staff, the ventilation grills near the ceiling, the corners where shadows gathered. She was not tame. She had never been tame. But she was, in some careful and untranslatable way, present. The kittens grew fast the way wild things do, as though they understood instinctively that time is not a luxury. Within weeks they were tumbling over each other in the straw, batting at enrichment toys the staff had placed in the enclosure, stalking imaginary prey along the baseboards with a seriousness that made the caretakers smile. Mara watched them with the unhurried attention of a mother who is also a teacher, letting them fail, letting them try again, intervening only when it mattered. The staff began documenting everything, not for research exactly, more the way you write things down when you suspect you are watching something you won't fully understand until later. The younger male, the one they had found pressed against Mara in the snow, had been moved to an adjacent naturalized enclosure once he was strong enough. He could not be housed with the kittens, but he remained close. He spent long portions of the day at the shared fence line, lying with his chin on his paws, his gaze moving between Mara and the kittens with an attentiveness that nobody on the team had a clinical term for. They called him River. They called the family unit Mara, River, and the 3 kittens the Snow family. It started as a shorthand and became something more. Caretakers who had no scheduled shifts began stopping by anyway. Not to intervene. There was nothing to intervene in, but simply to be near something that felt in the middle of an ordinary workday, like proof of something, that life returns. That the body remembers how to continue even when everything around it has gone cold. But as the kittens grew stronger, a different kind of reckoning quietly arrived. The enclosure that had been sanctuary was beginning to feel, to everyone watching, like a limitation. Mara's gaze, when it settled on the high windows and the pale sky beyond them, had changed. It was no longer searching, it was waiting. Spring came the way it always does in pine country, not all at once but in small surrenders. The snow pulled back from the south-facing slopes first, then from the road shoulders, then finally from the hollow places where it had held longest. The forest that had nearly swallowed Mara and her family whole was green again, unhurried and vast, as if it had never been anything else. The release was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, early enough that the light was still soft and the roads were empty. Kara drove. She had asked to. No one questioned it. The truck climbed the forest road in silence, past the pine ridge, past the bend where the hikers had first spotted 2 small shapes in the snow 4 months earlier. The carriers were secured in the back, Mara and the kittens in one, River in another. They rode quietly, the way animals do when they sense that something is about to change and have decided to trust it. The release site was a ridge overlooking a long sweep of protected forest, miles of canopy broken only by a frozen creek that was just beginning to remember how to move. The team set the carriers down in the tall grass at the tree line. Nobody spoke. Dr. Reyes unlatched Mara's door and stepped back. For a moment nothing happened. Then Mara stepped out. She moved slowly at first, her nose working the air. Pine resin, melt water, the particular green smell of things pushing back up through thawed earth. She took 3 steps into the grass and stopped. She turned her head, just once, back toward the truck, toward Kara, who was standing very still with her hands at her sides and her jaw tight. It lasted only a second. Then Mara turned back to the forest, and her kittens spilled out behind her, and River followed, and together the 4 of them moved into the tree line and were gone. No ceremony, no hesitation, just the dappled light closing behind spotted coats, and then only the sound of the creek and the wind moving through the upper branches. The team stood at the ridge for a long time without speaking. Weeks later, a motion-triggered trail camera captured them, Mara leading her 3 young through a corridor of birch and pine, their movements easy and unbothered, River a shape in the background keeping pace. Kara watched the footage on a laptop in the break room late one evening. Alone. She watched it 3 times. She didn't try to explain what she felt. Some things that happen in the wild don't ask to be explained. They only ask to be witnessed. She had been rescued once. What she needed was never to be saved again.